The crowd had gathered in silence, their eyes fixed on the tomb guard, his uniform pressed to perfection, his rifle gleaming under the sun. Each step he took echoed like thunder across the marble, a rhythm older than memory itself. But among the respectful hush, a ripple of mischief broke the calm. 3 young men lingered at the edge of the path, smirking, their voices louder than the sacred silence allowed. "Watch this," one whispered, his tone dripping with arrogance. As the guard approached, they shifted subtle at first. A sneaker scuffed forward, toe stretching just an inch across the guard's sacred route. Another leaned in, ready to trip him, eager for laughs and cell phone footage. The crowd stiffened. Gasps cut through the silence. Mothers pulled children closer. Veterans clenched their jaws. Everyone knew no one interferes with the tomb guard. Not here, not ever. And yet, the world seemed to slow as the guard's boot came down, just inches from their trap. The people thought they would see him stumble. They thought this unshakable sentinel would falter, that his honor could be mocked. But in the very next breath, everything changed. The guard did not stumble. He did not waver. His heel struck the ground with the same thunderous finality as every step before. His eyes, cold and unbroken, locked onto the bullies. Time froze. The laughter that had hovered on their lips evaporated. They had expected weakness, a break in discipline. Instead, they were met with something they had never faced before, a wall of honor, forged from silence, sharpened by sacrifice. And the crowd, they felt it, an invisible weight pressed down over the gathering. Respect, fear. In that one heartbeat, everyone knew, this was no ordinary soldier. This was a guardian. The boys shifted nervously, but it was too late. Their prank had ignited something far greater than they ever imagined, because this would not just be a scuffle. This would be a lesson, a story they would never forget. The guard's rifle gleamed in the light, his posture unshaken, his silence louder than any roar. And with that, the stage was set. The silence of Arlington was not just silence. It was a living thing. Every stone, every blade of grass, carried whispers of the fallen. Thousands of names carved in white marble stood like sentinels themselves, forever watching, forever remembered. And among them walked one man, a man whose life had been broken, rebuilt, and now bound to this duty. His name was Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes. Years before he donned the immaculate uniform of the tomb guard, Hayes had been a soldier in a world far louder than Arlington. He had walked through deserts where the sun scorched everything it touched. He had known the chaos of ambushes, the roar of explosions, the endless nights of waiting for dawn that never seemed to come. But the memory that haunted him most wasn't the noise of war. It was the silence of a friend's final breath. Corporal James "Jimmy" Carter, Hayes' closest brother-in-arms, had been caught in the crossfire of an IED blast. Hayes had dragged him through dirt and fire, screaming, pleading, but Jimmy's last words were not of fear. They were of duty. "Don't let them forget me." Those 5 words had burned themselves into Hayes' soul. When he came home, medals felt heavy but empty. Crowds cheered, but their voices were distant. He needed something else. Something permanent. That was when he sought out the old guard. The tomb of the unknown soldier was not just a post. It was a vow, a place where silence spoke louder than war, where discipline was not a performance, but a living promise to the nameless, the fallen, the forgotten. Hayes endured what few could. Training that broke men down to their core, inspections that measured errors in fractions of an inch, weeks of marching in storms, in blistering heat, in snow that cut like knives. To falter was to dishonor not just the tomb, but the thousands resting beneath the marble. And Hayes never faltered, because every step, every strike of his heel, was for Jimmy. But Arlington was not immune to the outside world. Tourists came, respectful and wide-eyed, but so did others, people who could not understand the weight of what they were witnessing. And on that day, the ones who stood out were not veterans, not grieving families, not wide-eyed children. It was 3 boys, barely men, dressed in brand-name jackets and expensive sneakers, their laughter out of place among the whispers of history. They were not soldiers. They were not mourners. They were the privileged sons of wealth and influence, children of men who wielded power like a weapon. One's father was a judge, another a corporate magnate, the third the son of a rising politician. They had been raised believing rules were made for others, never for them. To them, Arlington was just another backdrop, another place to show off, to record a prank, to chase a few seconds of internet fame. Their arrogance showed in every gesture, the way they smirked at the solemn march, the way they mimicked the guards' steps, exaggerating, mocking, the way they elbowed each other, whispering, "He's just a toy soldier." The crowd noticed. Veterans shifted uncomfortably. Parents shook their heads, pulling children aside, but no one dared confront them, not yet. Everyone knew the guard would not break. That was the unshakable law. Still, whispers spread among the crowd. Why here? Why now? Because Arlington was not just a cemetery, it was the heart of sacrifice. Every marble headstone carried weight. The tomb itself represented not one soldier, but all who had fallen without a name. It was sacred ground, guarded 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, through storms, through snow, through war and peace alike. No matter what happened in the world outside, here the guard remained unmoving, unyielding. The bullies did not see it. They did not feel the chill that crept into the hearts of those who stood there. To them, this was a stage, and they had found their audience, but the audience wasn't laughing. Not yet. One veteran in the crowd clenched his fists so tight his knuckles turned white. He had once stood in uniform himself, and the sight of those boys mocking the march boiled his blood. But he also knew what it meant to cross the guard's path, and so he held his tongue. A mother whispered to her son, "Watch, learn, this is what respect looks like." But the boy's wide eyes were not on the guard's boots, they were on the smirking boys, inching closer, and Hayes, behind his sunglasses, behind his stone-carved expression, he saw them. He felt their intent long before their shoes scraped against the marble. His training told him, ignore, endure, continue the march. But deep inside, beneath the silence, the fire burned. Not for himself, not for his pride, but for Jimmy, for every name carved in stone, for every family that had wept in silence before those graves. This wasn't going to be a simple prank. This was about to become a test, not of strength, not of force, but of honor, and Daniel Hayes had never once failed a test of honor. The bullies lingered at the edge of the marble path, their sneakers squeaking softly against the stone. Their laughter came in bursts, sharp, mocking notes that cut through the silence meant for reverence. At first, it was subtle, a fake cough, a poorly timed chuckle during the guard's pivot, a muttered nice toy rifle barely loud enough to be caught. But disrespect is like fire, once sparked, it spreads. By the time Hayes turned at the end of his measured stride, they had grown bolder. One raised his hand in a sloppy, exaggerated salute, palm facing the wrong way, giggling like it was a joke. Another mimicked the rifle movement, pretending to shoulder an invisible weapon. The third simply smirked, arms crossed, as though the entire ceremony were beneath him. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Tourists who had been recording quietly now angled their phones toward the boys. A few murmurs rippled, disapproving yet cautious. Veterans in particular could hardly believe what they were witnessing still. Hayes's boots struck with flawless rhythm. Left, right, left, right. Every echo was a drumbeat of defiance, not against them but against the temptation to break his sacred vow of silence. The bullies noticed, and they hated it. "Man, he's not even looking at us," one muttered, irritation creeping into his voice. "That's the point," another said, louder this time. "He's programmed, like a robot. Bet I can make him flinch." Their whispers weren't whispers anymore. They wanted to be heard, wanted attention, wanted a reaction. The youngest in the crowd, children clutching their parents' hands, stared whited, torn between fear and confusion. Some veterans shook their heads in disgust, one mumbling under his breath, "God help them if they knew what that rifle really means." Phones lifted higher. The crowd knew something was coming, something ugly. And Hayes, he felt it. Every tomb guard is trained to sense disturbance without breaking stride. Peripheral vision, the sound of shoes on marble, even the slight shift of air when someone moves too close, all of it registers. Yet his face betrayed nothing. His march remained untouched, his rifle steady, his stare fixed forward. He embodied the unspoken creed: we do not react, we endure. But endurance has its limits, and the boys were determined to find them. The first bold move came with a mocking step. One of them, tall and lanky, stepped into the guard's path, but only halfway. Dragging his sneaker across the line and pulling back at the last second, he chuckled as if daring Hayes to acknowledge him. The crowd gasped. Mothers clutched their children tighter. A veteran muttered, "Unbelievable," shaking his head. Hayes pivoted, perfectly timed, heel down, rifle snapping to angle, silence as heavy as stone. He didn't so much as glance at the intruder. The boy grinned wider. "Told you, he won't do anything." That was all the encouragement the others needed. They leaned in, whispering crude jokes, deliberately loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Bet he cries himself to sleep. Look at him, dull soldier. Guard dog in a Halloween costume." Every word chipped at the sacred silence, every insult twisting the knife in the hearts of those who understood what this place meant. The veterans in the crowd shifted, anger radiating from them. One old Marine, his cap pulled low, clenched his fists until his knuckles went white. He wanted to step forward, to silence them himself, but he respected the guard too much to interfere. This wasn't his duty. It was Hayes's. The children, though, were frightened. One little girl buried her face in her mother's coat, whispering, "Why are they being mean to the soldier?" Her mother hushed her softly, eyes locked on the unfolding scene. And the phones, they caught it all, every second. Dozens of lenses now aimed at the confrontation, a digital wall of witnesses waiting for the moment history would break its silence. But Hayes's silence did not break. Step, turn heel down, rifle angle. The eternal march continued. The boys grew restless. They weren't satisfied with mockery alone. They wanted dominance, all right, one said, smirking. Watch this. He exaggerated a trip, sticking his leg far across the marble just as Hayes approached. Gasps erupted from the crowd. The little girl shrieked. Even the veterans jolted forward instinctively. But Hayes did not stumble, his stride adjusted by a fraction, precision guiding his boot just clear of the trap. His heels struck the marble with the same commanding thunder as before, as though the attempt hadn't even existed. The crowd froze. Silence more profound than before swallowed the air. The boy who had stretched his leg blinked, stunned. He had expected chaos, maybe even laughter. Instead, he was met with something far heavier, the unshakable reality that he had not bent the guard. The guard had bent him. And still Hayes marched, but the boys weren't done. Not yet. Frustration burned in their smirks. Being ignored was worse than being scolded. It gnawed at them. They exchanged glances, nodding almost imperceptibly, and decided to cross the final line. The first shoved the second forward. He stumbled closer to the guard's shoulder, brushing against the sacred space with deliberate disrespect. The second laughed nervously, but it was forced. "What, is he gonna arrest me?" he scoffed, loud enough for the crowd. And then came the third, the boldest. He stepped forward, standing directly in Hayes's path, planting both feet like a barrier, arms crossed, chin lifted, his smirk daring the soldier to break formation. The crowd erupted. Gasps, shouts, a chorus of disbelief. Parents yanked their children back. Veterans took steps forward, unable to stand still. Every camera phone tilted upward, trembling hands trying to capture the impossible. And Hayes, his boot froze inches from the boy's sneaker. For the first time that day, his march halted. The air grew suffocatingly silent. Even the birds seemed to stop. Behind the sunglasses, Hayes's eyes burned like steel. Every muscle in his body remained disciplined, yet a storm gathered beneath the surface. This was the line, the sacred boundary, the one rule even the most foolish rarely dared to cross. And now, it had been crossed. The crowd held its collective breath. Children clutched tighter to their parents. Veterans stood rigid, salutes half formed out of instinct, for the first time all day. Something was about to break the silence, and when it did, the world would never forget. The marble echoed with silence. For the first time, Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes stood still, his boot hovering just inches from the sneaker of the boy who had dared to block his path. The boy smirked, emboldened. His friends snickered behind him, cell phones raised. To them, it was a game, a stunt to upload, a prank to brag about later. But to everyone else watching, it was an unthinkable violation. A mother clutched her son tighter, whispering, "Don't look." A veteran's jaw clenched so hard it looked as though his teeth might break. Phones trembled in hands, recording every millisecond of the unbearable pause. And then it happened. Hayes's rifle snapped upward in a single thunderous motion. His gloved hand gripped the weapon with precision as the butt struck marble. The sound like a cannon firing across the cemetery. The crowd jolted. A wave of gasps rippled outward. Then came the voice. It was not a shout. It was a detonation. Deep, booming, carrying across every stone and grave. A command voice forged in years of battlefield orders and honed through endless hours of drill. "Stand aside." The words struck like hammers, reverberating through the air, rattling the hearts of every man, woman, and child who heard them. The bullies flinched. Their smirks faltered. The one standing in Hayes's path instinctively stepped back half a pace, the cocky defiance in his eyes evaporating under the weight of the guard's presence. But Hayes was not done. His rifle shifted once more, slamming back into its pristine carry position with mechanical precision. He took one measured step forward, his boot striking the marble like a judge's gavel. And again, the voice thundered, "Respect the tomb." The sacred silence of Arlington returned. But now it was different, heavier. Every person in that crowd felt it pressing down on them, the enormity of sacrifice, the centuries of honor, the blood of the nameless resting beneath the stone. The boys' faces drained of color. Phones that had once been weapons of mockery now shook in their hands. recording a lesson they hadn't asked for but would never escape. No one in the crowd moved. No one breathed. It was as though the entire cemetery itself had bowed its head, listening to the words that echoed not just from Hayes's throat, but from the very spirit of the unknowns. The bullies stumbled backward, no longer daring to laugh. Their bravado cracked in an instant. One muttered, "It's just a job," but even he couldn't finish the thought. The guard's presence crushed the words in his throat. A child whispered, "He's not afraid." Her father's reply came soft, "Reverend, that's because he's standing for more than himself." Hayes did not move to pursue them. He didn't need to. His posture was enough, shoulders squared, chin high, rifle gleaming in the sunlight, a living statue of defiance and respect. But his silence was no longer the silence of restraint. It was the silence of dominance, a silence louder than their jeers, heavier than their arrogance, sharper than any insult they could hurl. Then came the moment that sealed everything. The boy who had blocked his path, still standing too close, tried to salvage his pride with a final sneer. "You can't touch me," he spat, his voice trembling despite the words. Hayes's head turned just slightly, not a full glance, not a break of discipline, but enough for the boy to feel the full force of eyes hidden behind those mirrored sunglasses. That tiny motion carried more power than a shove. It carried history, sacrifice, the weight of every unknown soldier who could no longer speak for themselves. And the boy broke. He staggered back fully now, tripping over his own friend's foot. His phone slipped from his hand, clattering against the stone. The sound rang out like a verdict. The crowd exhaled collectively, a rush of gasps, murmurs, even soft applause from somewhere in the back. Veterans nodded grimly. Parents whispered, "Remember this." Children clutched tighter to their hands, wide-eyed at the lesson unfolding before them. For Hayes, it was not about humiliation. It was not about winning. It was about preservation. Preservation of sacred ground. Preservation of honor. Preservation of a vow that no prank, no disrespect, no arrogance could ever shatter. He inhaled once, deeply, the sun glinting on his rifle. Then with flawless precision he resumed his march. Left, right, left, right. The eternal rhythm continued, as though nothing had happened. But something had happened. Everyone knew it. Everyone felt it. The bullies huddled at the edge of the path, shaken, pale, their bravado extinguished. They tried to laugh it off, muttering excuses, "Just a joke, didn't mean anything, it's not that serious." But the crowd wasn't listening. The crowd had already chosen its side. Phones stayed lifted, but no longer for entertainment. Now, they were recording history, capturing proof that honor does not bend, that silence does not mean weakness, that even in the face of mockery, discipline remains unbroken. One by one, whispers spread. "Did you hear that voice? It shook me to my bones." That wasn't a man yelling. That was something greater. And as Hayes marched on, the marble echoing beneath his boots, the crowd knew the story would not stay within those gates. It would travel. It would inspire. It would remind the world that tradition still stands tall, unshaken. The turning point was complete. The bullies had come to mock. Instead, they had been humbled, not by fists, not by anger, but by a single man, a single voice, a single unbreakable march. And the crowd, stunned, silent, reverent, would never forget it. The silence that had swallowed Arlington moments before now hung like a heavy curtain over the bullies. Their laughter had died, their smirks vanished, and their bravado had melted like wax under a torch. One of them, the tallest, the one who had first tried to block Hayes's path, fumbled with his phone. It had slipped from his hand during the guard's command. Its screen cracked against the marble. He glanced at his friends, hope in his eyes that someone could salvage the humiliation. But the crowd had already decided. A security officer, who had been stationed at a discreet distance, finally stepped forward. He had observed the entire ordeal unfold, the gears, the attempted tripping, the decisive command, and knew exactly what to do. "Step aside, gentlemen," the officer said firmly, his voice cutting through the remnants of tension. The bullies froze. One stammered, It was just a joke." The officer did not flinch. He extended a hand, guiding them carefully but firmly toward the exit path. The crowd murmured, approval and relief mixing in a low hum. Phones continued to record, capturing every step of their retreat, every flush of shame on their faces. Hayes watched. His boots still struck the marble in perfect rhythm. Left, right, left, right. Not a flicker of emotion crossed his face. Not a nod, not a glance. He did not even acknowledge the boys being escorted away. That was the power of the guard. Unshakable, disciplined. The child in the crowd, the little girl who had hidden her face behind her mother, peeked out. She whispered softly, almost in awe, He's a hero. Her words carried further than anyone imagined. Veterans nodded subtly, parents' eyes glistened, and even some of the tourists who had only come for a photo found themselves shivering with reverence. Hayes paused briefly at the tomb, as though acknowledging something beyond the physical. His gloved hand brushed lightly against the rifle. A silent salute to the countless unknown soldiers whose names were carved into the marble. A single bird chirped, breaking the stillness, and the echo of Hayes's boots continued, a drumbeat of persistence and devotion. The bullies had been removed, but the lesson lingered in every heart present. The incident, captured in dozens of phones, had already begun spreading across social media. Clips would be shared thousands of times, inspiring awe, respect, and a sense of wonder at what discipline could achieve. No one would question the lesson. Honor cannot be mocked. Discipline cannot be broken. Silence can speak louder than words. Hayes resumed his measured march, each step echoing through Arlington like the toll of a bell. The sunlight glinted off his polished rifle, highlighting every crease in his uniform. He was a living testament to the creed of the tomb guard. We do not flinch. We do not falter. We endure. A veteran in the crowd leaned over to whisper to a companion, "That man just taught a lesson no one else could. Not with words, not with fists. With himself." His calm alone demanded respect. The child repeated softly, "Hero." The words were small, but they carried weight heavier than the marble around them. They captured the essence of what the guard represented: sacrifice, dignity, and the unbreakable bond between the living and the fallen. The bullies had learned humility the hard way. Humiliation stung them more than any lecture could have. Parents of other children shook their heads in silent disapproval. Security ensured the boys left without incident, but their faces were burned into memory, a reminder that disrespect in sacred spaces comes at a cost. Meanwhile, Hayes stood, silently surveying the scene. The crowd had begun to disperse, some pausing to whisper stories of the incident to friends, some lingering to take in the solemn beauty of Arlington. The guard did not speak. He did not move faster or slower. He simply continued an unbroken line of dedication that had weathered challenge and emerged victorious. Every step, every motion, every measured breath was a lesson. Not for the bullies, not for the parents, not for the cameras, but for the principle itself. Discipline had prevailed. Mockery had failed, and the world had watched, as the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the memorial stones. One thing was certain: the incident would be remembered, not for the bullies, not for the momentary chaos, but for the unwavering dignity of a man who refused to yield. Hayes's march continued, timeless, eternal, as if he were no longer a single man, but the embodiment of every soldier who had ever stood guard in silence. For those watching, the lesson was indelible. Respect is earned, discipline is lived, and honor is never compromised. The crowd had begun to thin, the soft murmur of conversations replacing the deafening tension that had filled Arlington just moments before. Parents guided their children along the marble pathways. Veterans lingered to pay silent respects, and tourists carefully adjusted their cameras, now capturing only the solemn beauty of the grounds. But one small figure remained, her wide eyes fixed on Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes. The little girl who had whispered "hero" moments ago now stepped forward cautiously. Clutching her mother's hand, Hayes's boots continued their steady rhythm, left, right, each strike echoing through the hallowed grounds. The world around him seemed to fade, leaving only the weight of history and the echo of those who had come before. From a distance, the colonel of the tomb guard approached, his uniform crisp, his gaze steady. He stopped a few paces away from Hayes. Without a word, he saluted. A simple gesture, but one loaded with meaning. Hayes paused mid-step, returning the salute with exact precision, his rifle held in perfect alignment. The sun caught the metal, creating a brief, brilliant gleam, a silent acknowledgement of dedication, honor, and duty fulfilled. The little girl whispered again, this time loud enough for her mother to hear, "He's a hero." The words floated through the air like a promise. Her father nodded silently, eyes moist, understanding that this moment was far more than a lesson about bravery. It was about respect, about seeing the weight of responsibility and choosing to bear it without complaint or recognition. After the salute, Hayes lowered his rifle and touched a small, worn dog tag beneath his uniform, Jimmy's. His fingers traced the engraved letters lightly. A private moment of reflection. The battlefield and the memorial, the chaos and the silence, all converged in that gesture. "I promised," he whispered under his breath, "though no one could hear, I would never let you be forgotten." Around him, the air seemed to carry the weight of centuries, Names etched in marble bore witness to the unbroken vow of the tomb guard, a line of men who had learned long ago that strength was not in fists or firepower, but in the unyielding commitment to honor. The little girl's mother knelt beside her, whispering softly, "Do you see why we stand quietly here? Why we show respect?" "Yes," the child replied. "Because he's protecting everyone who can't protect themselves." Hayes resumed his march once more, each step deliberate, each motion measured. The cameras had stopped recording, the crowd had dispersed, but the lesson remained. Discipline had triumphed, mockery had faltered, and honor had endured. As he disappeared into the distance, a soft breeze carried whispers across the grounds, rustling the flags that flew over Arlington. Some were words of awe, some of gratitude, but all carried the same sentiment, that the day had witnessed something extraordinary, a living testament to the unshakable spirit of a man devoted to something far greater than himself. Hayes did not march for recognition. He marched because it was his duty, because it was a promise, because silence and stillness were sometimes louder than any roar. And in that quiet march, the little girl's voice, so small, yet so powerful, lingered in the air. Hero. It was not just a word. It was a vow, a lesson, a legacy. Even as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the tombstones, one truth remained clear: some acts of honor are never seen, yet they are felt by everyone who witnesses them. For Daniel Hayes, Staff Sergeant of the Tomb Guard, this was not a moment to boast or celebrate. It was a continuation of a life lived in service, a pledge renewed with every step, and a quiet victory that would echo long after the crowd had gone. Some lessons cannot be taught with words alone. Some victories are silent. Some strength is measured not in force, but in restraint. Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes did not march for applause. He did not command for recognition. He marched because the ground beneath his boots demanded it, because honor was not optional, because discipline was louder than chaos. The children, parents, veterans, and strangers who witnessed the day would carry it with them forever. A lesson etched not in marble but in memory, that respect is earned, not assumed, that tradition is not weakness, and that stillness can hold the weight of the world. Even the bullies, humiliated and chastened, had learned something vital, perhaps not immediately, perhaps not willingly, but the imprint of that moment, the unwavering stance, the booming command, the calm precision of a man devoted to a cause greater than himself, would follow them long after the laughter faded. For Hayes, it was another day of service, another day of quiet vigilance, another step in a line of duty older than any of us can truly understand. And for the rest of us, a reminder: tradition is not weakness, stillness is strength, honor endures. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the power of discipline and respect, share it. Tell others. Keep the legacy alive. Subscribe, support, and remember that true heroism is often quiet, uncelebrated, and unwavering, because sometimes the strongest voices are the ones that never speak.